Is Star Citizen pay to win? Yes. Okay, so while we could keep things really short and sweet here, the whole discussion around how hard currency impacts the game is a lot more nuanced. And I think that since SC is still in active development and a lot of questions around monetization don't have distinct answers yet, it's very much worth taking the time to talk about. So in this video, I'm going to make a slightly more robust argument about why I feel SC is pay to win, and talk about some steps I think the game's developer CIG should consider to avoid going too far down this particular rabbit hole. So if this sounds good to you, then grab a cup of tea while I roll the intro, then let's get into it. The $700 million mark and $48,000 game packages have got SC back in the focus of the big streamers, and as a regular Asmon Gold enjoyer, I caught his most recent video on the subject. I thought overall it was a good discussion, but at some point the chat turned onto the subject of pay to win. And no offense intended, since I know when you're put on the spot in a live interview, it's not anywhere as easy to make your point. But I don't think the folks he had on gave very good answers. We actually had a similar discussion around pay to win in our Discord very recently, and it makes for a contentious topic. And I think the key here is that there's quite a big reluctance to accept the pay to win label in a game that you like, because some particularly egregious examples of it have led to other games being declared dead on arrival. I'm looking at you, Diablo Immortals. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is something to just stick our heads in the sand over. I think it's something to look dead in the eye and have an open discussion about. I think a good place to start is with a solid definition of pay to win, because there are lots of different subcategories and terms that get thrown around that all muddy the waters. To me, pay to win is simply any situation where, in exchange for hard currency, one player gains an advantage over another. Within this, there's a fair bit of disambiguation: pay for convenience, pay to skip, etc., which generally serve to lessen the severity of a term like pay to win, but let's face it, they're all just cut from the same cloth. And one of the most common arguments I hear against the pay to win label in SC is that Star Citizen isn't pay to win because there is no winning. And while I can understand the root of this argument, that in a game projected to be as vast as SC, what I'm doing might have zero crossover with another player's gameplay, I also call bull on this statement. Not every player in SC is going to treat it competitively, but the game is very much set up to be a competitive experience. Competition is most obvious in the PvP aspects, where players and orgs will go toe-to-toe in outright combat. But it'll also exist in competition for resources, for territory, for racing titles, for rare drops, etc. Even those focused on more PvE loops like cargo hauling experience competition, and the scales can be unbalanced by cash purchases. Outposts, for example, might have a limited supply of a certain commodity, so if one player turns up in a C2 ahead of you in a freelancer, they have the capacity to buy that stock out before you get a look in. The reason that I say SC is pay to win is that on many levels the ship equals in-game power, and that power translates into some form of winning. There's logical progression in-game from one ship to the next. Haulers might go from a Hull A to a Connie Taurus to a C2 to a Hull D. Fighter pilots might go from a Mustang Alpha to an Arrow to an F7A. And the fact that you can pay dollars, euros, pounds or yen to achieve this progression as opposed to grinding in the game means the pay to win label is hard to argue against. But, because all good video essays have a but, the extent to which the game is pay to win is still up in the air. And I think there's a solid argument to be made that while CIG's funding model is dependent on these ship sales, they should take steps to curtail the extent of this power. Because pay to win in games is like salt in food. A bit of it is okay, and it can actually enhance the flavour. More money for development equals a better game. And one of the best things about Star Citizen is that, free of the demands of a traditional studio or publisher, CIG are actually attempting something ambitious and new, versus the safe rehashes that are too prevalent in modern gaming. But too much leaves a bad taste that people won't enjoy, meaning that most self-respecting people will just choose to avoid your restaurant. So for the next section of this video, I'm going to talk about a few things I think CIG should do to avoid the scales tipping too far towards pay to win. And let's kick things off with one that CIG are actually committed to and doing right already. A lot of you will be fully aware of this, but I'm conscious that some folks might be watching who've never played SC. And this is in-game availability. Chris Roberts and other CIG devs have stated multiple times that everything available in the Pledge store will also be available to acquire in-game just by playing, either through in-game purchase with UEC, reputation, or looting. And as of now, their money is already where their mouth is. Chips do have a bit of a delay where they're available exclusively to those who pledged for 3 to 6 months before they go on sale in the in-game ship shops for Alpha UEC. If you start out with a $45 game pack, then there are already more than 100 chips that you can potentially acquire just by playing, and comparatively there are only a handful which are currently exclusive to those who have paid for them. In time, these should be buyable too with credits. Armors and guns follow the same pattern. The Pledge store contains a number of rare versions, like my personal favourite orange aerial armour. I can go to in-game ship shops and just buy the yellow hazard version, that's statistically exactly the same. You can even find the rare version in loot boxes if you search around enough and the RNG gods are with you. And of course you could always just double tap me in the back of the head and steal my shiny orange suit. So to this end, I can buy an advantage. When we start fresh, the player who's sunk the hard cash in already has the cool armour to put on and can hop into the cockpit of a top tier space superiority fighter. But they don't have exclusivity to this power. Someone else can buy or find armour and guns and ships that are statistically identical, they just have to grind for them. I do want to go tangential just quickly at this point to call out one more commonly touted argument that I hear about pay to win. And that's the perfect negative correlation between money and time. A lot of people who want to make the argument that pay to win is fine, usually those who have paid, is that people fit neatly into two groups, those who are cash rich but time poor, and those who are time rich but cash poor. The argument usually hinges on two tiny slivers of the population. People who work really intense but high paying jobs, who have only a tiny bit of free time to play games, and those who don't have much money because they're living in their mum's basement and they still get an allowance for video games at 30 years old. But this argument doesn't really stand up to the tiniest bit of challenge. I bet that nearly all of you can think of someone in your life, a friend, family member, work colleague, who earns less than you and has less time. And I bet the reverse is true too. You can think of people who earn more than you and have more free time. There's so many variables because real life is just much more complicated than playing video games. All I'll say is please don't leave me comments using this argument, you kinda do make yourself sound a bit dumb. So getting back to in-game availability. Like I said, CIG's direction here is really good, but I still think it's important to talk about. Because if we think more about a 1.0 live release, where we have a point in time where the devs are committed to long-term persistence, I think some changes to the current system are merited. And the key thing I would like to see at this point is an end to the exclusivity window for ships. I think they should just simultaneously be available to those who have pledged for them and for UEC. Recently the F7A Mark II has shown how introducing a new ship can turn the meta on its head. And I would hate to see, in a live version of the game, the competitive landscape be defined by which orgs swipe the hardest as opposed to fly the hardest. Back when I played Last Oasis, I was in a competitive PvP guild, and we had clear doctrine that we followed in order to be at the bleeding edge of the scene. As the meta shifted, our officers broke down the best weapons and builds, and if we hadn't followed them, then we would have been at a material disadvantage. You might overcome this with skill, but you are handicapping yourself if you go off meta. It would really suck for the game if the best meta options in a given patch were locked behind a paywall. And this would actively discourage some of the population who may look for other games that don't suffer from this. This might not seem like a good commercial decision for CIG, but I think it actually does make perfect sense. League of Legends, for example, operates this model. New champions can be bought with in-game currency acquired by playing games, as well as with Riot Points, the hard cash version. And there is no exclusivity window. Most active players are easily able to afford new champs when they come out, without parting with real money. But that then means that there are many times more players who might fall in love with the new release, and then that follows through to microtransactions in the form of skins, or in the case of SC, ship paints. A fraction of the player base may continue to part with hundreds of dollars for a new ship in the live game, but if the ship was instantly available for UEC, I would imagine a much higher percentage would be happy to part with $10 for a ship paint. The next thing that I would focus on is refusing to sell everything. It could easily just be titled "Don't Get Too Greedy CIG." We already have ships, personal weapons and armour on sale in the pledge store, and given the structure of the sales, ship insurance is also up for grabs with hard cash. This is where we are, and you can take or leave SC on this basis. I would strongly petition CIG to stop right there. I would hate to see them start offering more of the stuff that you currently have to earn in-game for cash. Ship components are a prime example. You might be able to buy an advanced ship, but kitting it out with the highest grade of shields, power plants, coolers, quantum drives and weapons takes unavoidable time investment, and represents one of the game's few current in-game currency and time sinks. Having a superior ship is already enough of an advantage. Don't compound this by making components pay to win as well. The new Master Mode flight model is actually something I really enjoy, but it's undoubtedly reduced, not removed but reduced, the impact of player skill. So the other side of this equation is therefore ship power, and this in turn can be broken down into the ship itself and the loadout. Keeping loadouts exclusively an in-game acquisition helps to level the playing field between those who pay and those who don't. And in fact, I'd go further and make top-tier loadouts more difficult to acquire as the game expands. Maybe you have to travel or build reputation with exclusive vendors to get the best kit. Or even better, find materials with which to craft and enhance components, or trade with other players who focus on this niche. Loadout can also help to generate more areas of asymmetry between players. One player might have a really advanced ship but a weaker stock loadout, while another might have an objectively poorer ship, but through playtime investment have a kick-ass loadout that makes them more competitive. And this is just one area, but I think it can apply to many others, aspects like player housing, faction reputation, NPC crew, etc. These are all areas that I think should just be left alone as in-game progression, as opposed to appearing on the pledge store. I've titled the next chapter Fleet Infrastructure, because I was honestly struggling for a term to encapsulate it. But really, I'm getting at a variety of economic factors that I hope will go to supporting a ship, so it just doesn't exist in isolation. I didn't play Elite Dangerous as much as many of you, but at the time I did, fleet carriers were just entering the game. And I thought the system of maintenance costs that was used was exceptionally good for putting a limit on their usage and power. So as well as an initial cost of 5 billion credits, fleet carriers required payments starting at 5 million credits per week to maintain. So essentially a 0.1% tax on the cost of the ship. Now since you couldn't cash shop this stuff, at least when I played, I don't know about now, the weekly cost would not represent an issue to anyone who had one. If you had built up your own economic infrastructure to the point where you could afford the 5 billion credits to build a fleet carrier, then you wouldn't have a problem with 5 million credits a week to maintain one. But I think a similar system of maintenance or berthing tax in Star Citizen could really help to reduce the power of cash purchases. If there was a similar cost associated with any active ships, in effect those that you delivered from your fleet manager, then on day one of the live game, players and organisations would just not have the economic infrastructure to immediately deploy all of their capital ships. Those with large fleets of cash-bought ships would still have a huge advantage, in that they wouldn't need to sink resources into acquiring the hulls themselves. But some form of tax that scales with ship value would act as kind of a speed bump, reducing the potency of big cash pledges, particularly in the early game, and creating a fairer playing field. Buying a bit of breathing space for those who are purely grinding is really what we're after here. There are all sorts of levers that CIG can pull here. Ship insurance, taxation systems, maintenance, even licenses to operate certain classes of ship in a similar way to EVE. And these could all act as a bit of a brake on the rate at which some players accelerate away from the rest. It also introduces an area in which skill matters. If we think about two hypothetical player organisations, one might be full of big spenders but not necessarily as well organised, or they might lack the sense of common purpose that another group has. And at that point the second group, despite not having as many big backers, stands a better chance of competing on the basis of their graft. Land claiming is an area which shares a lot of the same points, but I think it's so important that it deserves a clean chapter of its own. At the last CitizenCon, CIG did an amazing presentation on land claim mechanics, and as a survival game junkie, base building is something that I am just incredibly excited for. I do have a complete breakdown on these mechanics in another vid, which I'll link in the video description if you're interested. One thing which I would repeat from that vid, in the context of this one, is that I truly believe that land claiming is something that, even if it's fully cooked, should be delayed beyond an initial 1.0 release. Some players already have land claim licenses in their hangar, required to lay permanent claim to territory within UEE space. Either as a result of a very limited sale of the beacons themselves, or on account of having bought a consolidated Outland Pioneer, the $850 daddy of base building. CIG have previously said that there's not going to be an issue with land scarcity, because the planned SC universe is so massive, but for the third time in this video, I'm going to call bull. Some of the most exciting moments in gaming for me have come from land grabs in MMOs and survival games. Day one of a freshly wiped Ark server is just 48 hours of energy drinks, instant noodles and pure carnage as players clash to secure the prime base locations. It's not that there's insufficient square meterage on your average survival map, it's that there's scarcity of prime land, and Star Citizen is unlikely to be any different when it comes to land claim and building mechanics. There will be still a limited number of vastly superior plots. And this isn't just limited to the high risk zones, in fact it will probably be far more pronounced in the safest areas of HighSec. Particularly since once placed, these land claims and anything built on them will be invulnerable. Imagine a major hub system like Terra, with multiple jump gates and prosperous landing zones. How valuable would a claim near to one of those as an operational hub or safe harbour for an org be? And if you don't think that this would be a problem, I honestly think you're missing something here. Because I can assure you that if I've got no restrictions or restraints on me, then my org's day one strategy is going to involve using every land claim that we have available to secure vast tracts of land within these major hubs. That subsequently nobody will be able to take from us ever as long as we can make up the tax payments. We'd also be looking for areas in low-sec UEE space with significant economic advantages, mineable resources for instance. It doesn't matter that we can't defend them early, we don't even have to develop the resources. We just need to claim them so that you can't. So if it were up to me, I would employ a trick that many survival games have used to great effect in the past and do a staggered release of certain features, particularly land claims. Let everyone get to a 1.0 build, let folks get their economy up and running, let those who don't own land claim beacons for cash have time to buy them for UEC, and then fire the starting gun on the land rush and let's enjoy what will undoubtedly be one of the most chaotic and fun-filled periods in gaming. Well, it turns out that I had more to say on this subject than I thought when I started writing this script, and to be honest I could probably rant on about it for a fair while longer. I think I'll close it out with one final point, and that's that I think it would be best for CIG if they don't shy away from the multiplayer nature of the game. It's honestly refreshing to find an MMO that's committed to both M's in that acronym, and the requirement for player crew on big ships is one of the most effective tools for ensuring that folks who have the funds to buy big ships need to rely on those players who don't. I know that CIG have discussed NPC crew as an option, and I absolutely think it makes sense to be able to hire AI to run parts of a big ship. If nothing else, I think it's a great idea to make sure that people don't get stuck with dull gameplay. Taking a ship like an Aegis Javelin for example, who wants to spend their entire evening manning Point Defense Turret 4 just on the off chance that a torpedo falls within your narrow arc of fire? And similarly, I don't think that those who prefer to play solo should be forced to only play in ships with a single seat. I reckon it's cool if they can hire a couple of NPC crewmates to help them out with a medium ship like a Connie or a Cutlass. I do think that big ships should always take multiple players to run, and there shouldn't be a situation where it's at all realistic to hire 30 NPCs to run your entire Idris or Javelin while you just kick back in the captain's chair and tell it where to go. This would mean that some elements of the game aren't available to everyone. Not all people enjoy getting together in big groups and coordinating their gameplay. But as long as there are plentiful ships that can be handled solo, why does everything have to be available? The benefits this has far outweigh the negatives to my mind. In particular, it makes for less of an us and them mentality between the haves and have-nots of the game. It means that those folks who have money to burn on a game like SC aren't paying to win over those people who don't. It actually means they're paying to subsidise the fun for everyone. So like I said, I'll try and wrap things up here because otherwise we could go on until the sun goes down. I think it's a really interesting topic for discussion, and it's one we should be having as much as possible with CIG. Because is Star Citizen pay to win? Yes, but to what extent is still very much up for debate. And I know that some folks will think that I just hate the whales, and I'll probably have at least one comment down there calling me a broke boy, but I really don't. Most people I know, regardless of what they've spent on SC, want one thing more than anything else: an amazing game. And just speaking for myself and for many of those who I've talked to, there are plenty who have spent big money on this game who do not want to see it turn into a pure pay-to-win fiasco, even if that means that they don't get as much of an advantage over others as they might. But as ever, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts, so please do let me know down in the comments, and the door to our Discord is always open, even if you just want to come in for a chat. You'll find the link down in the video description below. But with all that said, thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and I look forward to seeing you next time.